So today we're tackling a really fascinating and honestly a pretty challenging question. What happens when you take one of the most revered figures in all of history and judge his actions not by the religion he founded, but by the ancient law he said he came to fulfill? We're going to walk through a source text that does exactly that. It measures the life of Jesus, as told in the Gospels, against the legal and spiritual framework of the Hebrew Bible. You might know it as the Tanakh, and its first 5 books, the Torah, contain the absolute core laws of Judaism. All right, let's get into it. And really, this is the core question our source material is built around. This isn't about comparing modern beliefs, not at all. This is an investigation that applies a very specific, very ancient legal standard to the words and actions of Jesus. Understanding this unique framework, well, it's the key to the entire argument that's about to unfold. We're going to break this down step by step, almost like we're building a legal case. First, we'll get a handle on the source's unique point of view. Then, we'll lay out the exact standard of judgment it's using, pulled straight from the Torah. After that, we'll dive into the specific charges, see how the source handles the inevitable counterarguments, and finally, we'll get to its ultimate verdict.
All right, let's dive right in. Every argument has a starting line, and for our sourced argument, it all begins by establishing its very particular and very focused point of view.
Okay, before we go any further, I want to make something super clear. Our job here is just to neutrally lay out the case being made in this source text, which is called idoljesus.pdf. We're presenting its argument, which is that Jesus' actions, when you measure them against the Torah, actually led people away from the exclusive worship of God. We're not endorsing this view, we're simply explaining it. We're the messengers here. Now, every case needs a clear legal framework, right? A standard by which you judge the evidence. So this next section is all about laying out those non-negotiable principles from the Hebrew Bible that our source uses as its measuring stick. First up, a key term you're going to hear a few times. The source uses its own unique translation for the four-letter name of God. It calls him Aseity Absolute. Now, this isn't a random choice. It's picked very specifically to hammer home the idea of a single, solitary, completely self-sufficient, and absolute being. So, the source builds its entire case on these 5 pillars, drawn straight from the Tanakh. 1. God is one and totally alone. 2. God has no physical form. 3. God does not share his glory with anyone. 4. God demands exclusive worship, and straying from that is pretty much the worst offense imaginable. And 5, this one is critical for the argument, God is explicitly not a man. According to the source, these are the non-negotiables. These are the rules of the game. And here is where we see that standard put to work. The source first lays out a pattern for what it calls authentic prophets, or vessels, people like Joseph or Daniel. When these guys got praised for something amazing, they would immediately, without hesitation, deflect all that glory back to God. They were just the messengers, the conduits. But then, the source contrasts this directly with the actions of Jesus in the Gospels. It argues that he did the opposite, that he accepted direct worship and positioned himself as the essential go-between, or even the source of power. This contrast is absolutely central to its whole case.
Okay, the standard for judgment is set. Now we move into the real heart of the source's case, the specific charges it levels against Jesus, with every single one backed up by evidence it cites directly from the Christian Gospels.
The first charge, and it's a huge one according to the source, is idolatry. The argument is that Jesus accepted acts of worship that the Torah says are reserved only for Aseity Absolute. Now, in this framework, this is not some minor slip-up. This is a violation of the number 1 commandment. And here's one of the key exhibits. When the disciple Thomas sees Jesus and blurts out, "My master and my deity," the source really zeroes in on Jesus' response. It points out that there's no correction, no, "Hey, hold on, that worship belongs to God alone." Instead, the gospel records it as an affirmation for believing. The source argues this is a clear, undeniable acceptance of worship. The next charge kind of builds on the first one. It moves from simply accepting worship to actively demanding a status equal to God's. This one focuses on Jesus' own words about how much honor he's owed.
The source points to this quote as a smoking gun. That little phrase, "just as they honor the Father," is everything here. It's interpreted not as a call for respect, but as a demand for the exact same quality and degree of honor that's owed to God himself. And if God shares his glory with no one, well, you can see how the source says this is a direct violation.
And that brings us to charge number 3, which the source sees as a direct attack on the solitary, one and only nature of God. It's the claim that Jesus shared in God's glory before the world was even created. And listen to this. It's from a prayer by Jesus himself. The source argues this is just an unambiguous claim to have had glory with God before the universe even existed. This creates a huge logical puzzle for the Torah's framework, because if God is alone and shares his glory with no one, how could anyone else have been there sharing it with him from the very beginning? Now, any good argument has to anticipate the objections, right? You have to be ready for the "but what about" questions. In this next section, we're going to see how the source tries to systematically dismantle the most common defenses for Jesus' actions. And here it is, the big one, the counter-argument you were probably thinking of this whole time. If Jesus actually was God in human form, then of course he could accept worship and claim equal honor. The charges would just fall apart, right? So how does the source handle this? The source's comeback here is all about logic. It basically calls this circular reasoning. Remember that non-negotiable standard we talked about? One of the core rules from the Torah is that God is not a man. So from that specific point of view, claiming a man is God doesn't get you off the hook. The source says that's not the excuse. That is the core violation itself. Okay, but what about the miracles? For so many people, the signs and wonders are the ultimate proof of divine authority. Surely that settles it. Well, the source anticipates this one too. And again, the source goes straight back to its rulebook. It points to a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 13 that, get this, actually warns about a prophet who can perform real signs and wonders. According to that text, the ultimate test isn't the miracle, it's the outcome. Does this miracle worker lead you toward exclusive worship of the one God or away from it? In this framework, the miracles themselves don't prove a thing.
So, after presenting the charges and attempting to knock down the counter-arguments, the source is ready to move to its conclusion. It's time to summarize its final assessment based on all the evidence measured against that strict Torah standard.
And here it is, the final summary laid out nice and clear. The source concludes that Jesus violated these 6 core principles. He accepted worship. He demanded glory. He made himself the object of faith. He received worship in a physical body, violating God's formlessness. He met the definition of a false prophet laid out in Deuteronomy. And finally, he broke with the precedent of all prior prophets by claiming authority above them. And this all leads to the final, pretty stark concluding statement from the source document itself. It's a completely unwavering verdict, arguing that when judged solely and strictly by the laws of the Hebrew Bible, Jesus stands condemned by the very scripture he claimed to uphold.
And that leaves us with a really big final question to chew on. This entire investigation we've just walked through hinges on applying one very specific, very ancient standard to a set of accounts. It raises a fascinating point about interpretation itself. When an ancient text is all you have to go on, does the standard of judgment you choose automatically determine the verdict you're going to reach? It's a powerful thought to end on.